subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave us your opinion in the comments. A new dawn in New York City. If the man who betrayed his pregnant wife thought she would crawl back to him with nothing, why did the world's most powerful man secretly send a private jet for a woman everyone believed was defenseless? The laughter echoing through the ballroom of one of New York's most prestigious hotels should have sounded like music, but for Elena Vance, it was a dagger to the heart. All around, the eyes of the city's elite followed her, some with pity, most with brazen curiosity. She stood on the edge of the dance floor, trying to disappear into the wallpaper, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The borrowed silk dress felt too tight, and the heat of the room was stifling. The air was thick with the smell of money, designer perfume, and overly loud laughter, but none of it compared to the humiliation that burned her from within, the shame that made her want to flee, though she knew she had nowhere to go. 6 months pregnant, Elena felt more alone than ever. At the center of it all was Alexander Cross, her soon-to-be ex-husband, the man she had once entrusted with her life, her dreams, and now, the future of her child. Tonight, he looked like Wall Street's golden boy. His dark hair, perfectly coiffed, a tuxedo that looked custom-cut, a champagne glass in one hand and his new girlfriend in the other. If you could call a 23-year-old influencer, with endless legs and questionable morals, a girlfriend. Alexander was in his element, laughing, telling jokes, basking in the attention, as if he had just made the cover of Forbes, not finalized his divorce papers. Elena tried to stay in the shadows, but it was impossible. The gala was the event of the year. 300 people, 1,000 flashes, and 1,000,000 reasons to be seen. For years, she had been the woman by his side, smiling for photographers, helping him charm investors and executives. But tonight, she was an afterthought. Or worse, the joke. She heard the whispers as she passed. "Is that her? I thought she went back to her hometown. She looks awful. They say he left her with nothing. Poor thing, pregnant and ruined." She squeezed her purse tighter, feeling the sting behind her eyes. She wanted to scream that none of it was true, that she was not weak or a lost cause for the vultures surrounding her. But the truth was, she was afraid. She felt alone and didn't know what would happen next. At that moment, a laugh resonated near the bar, a sharp, cruel sound, unmistakable even above the music. Elena looked and saw Alexander, his hand on his lover's hip, telling a story to a group of men in suits. "She'll be begging to come back," he declared, smiling. "Mark my words, women like her can't survive on their own. She's just a pregnant housewife with no future. She'll be crawling back before the baby is born." His lover laughed and ran her fingers through his hair. The group erupted in knowing snickers. Elena's cheeks burned. She felt nauseous. She was about to run out, vision blurred by humiliation and rage. But at that precise moment, her phone vibrated in her purse. It was a message from an unknown number. "Ms. Vance, your jet is ready. Please proceed to the private terminal. Everything you need is waiting." She stared at the screen, certain it was a mistake or a cruel joke. She hadn't told anyone she was at the gala, and she definitely hadn't hired a jet. Who could be contacting her now, at her lowest moment? She looked up just in time to catch Alexander's gaze from across the room. His smile was cruel, smug. The arm around Lily's waist was a victory pose. Elena knew what he was thinking, that she had nothing left, nowhere to go, no cards to play, but Elena's pride would not let her break. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. and walked through the ballroom as if she were floating above them all. With each step, she remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every part of herself she had given for Alexander's dreams. Tonight, she was walking away from it all. She passed the stares, the laughter, and the whispers, and she did not look back. Outside, the night was surprisingly cold, the city lights blurred by rain. For a moment, Elena hesitated on the steps. She was afraid, but somewhere, deep inside her, a spark flickered. Perhaps this was what freedom felt like. Perhaps this was what starting over felt like. Her phone vibrated again. "Your driver is waiting. Terminal C, ask for Mr. Gold." Elena took a shaky breath, wrapped her borrowed coat around her, and stepped out into the night. She was no longer the abandoned wife at a party for someone else's future. She was a woman about to become someone new. She held her belly, feeling the baby kick, a reminder that she would never be alone. Inside, Alexander didn't even notice she had left. He toasted with his friends, certain of his victory. "She'll be back," he said, as the flashes and the music swelled. "She has nowhere to go." He was wrong. In that moment, a jet waited for Elena Vance on the tarmac. A new beginning, a new world, and a secret about herself that even she didn't fully understand. The joke was now on him, because tonight, Elena would become the story, and nothing would ever be the same. What would you do in Elena's situation? Would you get on that jet, or stay to confront Alexander? Comment your opinion, and tell me what moment in the story has impacted you the most. A simple past, and an uncertain future. Elena had always considered herself a normal woman. Not bland, not simple. Just someone who never asked for much, never tried to steal the spotlight. As a child, she was a bookworm, happy in the quiet corners of her school library, or with her hands in the soil of her parents' small farm. Her life had always been about hard work, kindness, and the belief that good things came to people who kept going, even through difficult times. She never expected a life like the one she found with Alexander. He was dazzling from the start, smart, witty, handsome in the classic old movie star way. They met at a university networking event in Madrid. Elena, 19, had gone as a favor to a friend. She barely knew how to talk to strangers, much less someone as self-assured as Alexander. But he made her feel seen. He listened when she spoke. For the first time, she felt special, although she couldn't quite believe it would last. The whirlwind was dizzying. Candlelit dinners in restaurants, flowers at her residence, endless conversations about their dreams for the future. Alexander talked about moving to New York, making a name for himself in finance, building a life that would be the envy of everyone. Elena was swept up in his ambition, his hunger for success. He called her the heart behind the engine, and told her that together they could conquer anything. Their wedding 2 years later was small but beautiful. Elena wore a borrowed dress from her cousin. Alexander's family flew in from San Francisco, bringing enough champagne for everyone to be smiling for days. They moved into a small flat in central Madrid, subsisting on Alexander's first salary as an analyst and Elena's part-time job at a children's bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but Elena loved it. She made their flat a home, cooking dinners in a tiny kitchen and writing little notes for Alexander to find before his long commutes to work. As Alexander climbed the corporate ladder, everything changed. The apartments grew larger, the parties more lavish. Elena learned to navigate social events, to smile and shake hands, to silence the loneliness that was creeping in. Alexander's hours got longer, his promises more fleeting. Elena poured herself into their home, organizing charity events, volunteering, and waiting up for him at night. She believed that being a good wife meant being supportive. She had always imagined herself as a mother. She envisioned a life full of small steps, bedtime stories, and laughter echoing in sun-drenched rooms. When she found out she was pregnant, she felt her whole world come back to life. At first, Alexander seemed happy. He hugged her tightly. He told her this was the next step in their legacy. For a brief moment, Elena allowed herself to believe their family would come together, that the distance between them would finally close. But with each passing week, Alexander's attention drifted further away. He was always working, always traveling, always just out of her reach. When Elena tried to talk to him, to tell him her fears or her hopes for their child, he would dismiss her with a distracted kiss or a quick promise to make it up to her. The man who had once told her she was his entire world barely seemed to notice her when he was in the room. And then there were the secrets, the late-night text messages, the inexplicable credit card charges, the cold, dismissive attitude whenever she asked questions. Elena found herself shrinking, trying to take up less and less space. She thought if she were quieter, more understanding, less demanding, Alexander would come back to her. She tried to be the perfect wife, organizing dinners, keeping up appearances, making excuses for him to friends and family who were starting to notice the cracks. It was the day she found a lipstick-stained napkin in his jacket pocket that everything changed. It wasn't hers. She sat on the edge of their bed for a long time, her heart pounding, her mind replaying every memory and every warning sign she had tried to ignore. She felt herself being lost, piece by piece, in a story she hadn't chosen. When she finally confronted him, Alexander didn't even bother to deny it. He laughed, said she was overreacting, told her that men like him had needs, and that if she couldn't handle it, perhaps she wasn't cut out for a life at the top. The next morning, her bank account was frozen. Her credit cards denied. She was left in his penthouse, alone, pregnant, and suddenly invisible to the only man she had ever loved. Elena moved out with nothing more than a suitcase and a box of baby clothes. She found a friend willing to rent her a spare room in the Malasanya neighborhood. Gone were the days of galas and luxury dinners. Elena took odd jobs, freelance bookkeeping, and tried not to panic when her baby moved at night, and she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But what Alexander never knew, and what Elena barely allowed herself to remember, was that she wasn't as defenseless as he thought. Her late grandmother had left her a small inheritance, which she had saved for years, untouched. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to keep her afloat while she figured out what to do next. She used it to quietly rebuild herself, paying for prenatal appointments, buying groceries, and keeping the lights on. In her darkest moments, Elena clung to one truth. She was more than a wife, more than a victim. She was a survivor, and the world hadn't seen the last of her. Interactive question. Do you think Elena was right to keep the inheritance a secret? Why or why not? The resurrection in the ballroom. The gala was more than another charity event. It was the ultimate social battlefield of Madrid's elite. Under the glitter of the legendary Ritz Hotel ballroom's crystal chandeliers, fortunes were made, deals were struck, and reputations were destroyed with a single rumor. To outsiders, it looked like a fairy tale, all elegance and bright lights. To Elena, it was a cage. Elena had spent countless nights in that same room, playing the loyal wife alongside Alexander as he pursued donors and courted the press. She had organized silent auctions, written thank you notes to executives, and posed smiling for 1,000 pictures she would never see. But tonight, she was not on Alexander's arm. She was a ghost floating among strangers, clinging to the last shreds of dignity she had left. She entered alone, unsure if she belonged there. The doorman barely looked at her invitation, and no one greeted her as she walked in. Elena caught her reflection in a gilded mirror, a little pale, a little tired, but standing tall. She forced herself to breathe and walked in, her head held high. Each table was a scene of Madrid's privilege. Diamond necklaces glittered against skin. Men in custom tuxedos talked business and money. Waiters glided by, carrying silver trays heavy with oysters and champagne. Across the room, the mayor posed for selfies with a tech billionaire's wife. This was Alexander's world, and for years, it had also been hers. But now, everything had changed. Elena noticed how conversations shifted as she passed. People would look at her, then look away. The same women she once called friends now whispered behind their hands. She was no longer the it girl on Alexander's arm, but a cautionary tale. The wife who lost everything. The woman who couldn't hold on to her man. Elena straightened her back and kept walking. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Across the room, Alexander was playing the charming host. His tuxedo fit like a second skin, his hair perfectly coiffed, his smile effortless. Lily, his new girlfriend, clung to his arm. The perfect ingenue, young, gorgeous, and dripping in borrowed diamonds. Alexander introduced her as my future to anyone who would listen, not caring that Elena could hear every word. He laughed a little too loudly, posed for the cameras, and made sure the whole room saw how happy he was. Elena watched from a distance, wishing she could disappear. The need to flee was overwhelming. She wanted to escape this theater of cruelty, to be anywhere but there, surrounded by reminders of everything she had lost. But something inside her, a stubborn spark, held her in place. She wasn't there for Alexander. She was there for herself, to reclaim the dignity he had tried to steal. As the night wore on, the tension in the room grew thicker. The orchestra played a waltz, couples twirled beneath the chandeliers, and Elena found herself stranded by the buffet table, alone. A familiar face approached, her old friend and former neighbor, Olivia. Olivia's eyes were kind but wary, as if she didn't know which side to be on. "Elena, hi," Olivia said, her voice soft. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Elena admitted, trying to smile. "You look well," Olivia lied. "Are you okay?" Elena nodded, unwilling to say more. She knew the rules of this world, never show weakness. Olivia hesitated, then squeezed her arm. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me," she said, and then was swept away by the tide of more powerful people. Elena found a quiet corner and tried to calm herself. She was tired, so tired, but she refused to leave. Not yet. She let her gaze wander across the ballroom, landing once more on Alexander and Lily, who were now surrounded by cameras and journalists. Alexander met her gaze for a split second. There was no regret in his eyes, just a smug satisfaction, as if he had won, and she was just another piece of collateral damage. It was then that Elena heard the laughter, loud, unmistakable, and directed at her. Lily was telling a story, her voice high and sharp. She really thought he'd never leave her. Poor thing. I mean, look at her. She can barely stand up. The circle of people around her laughed, not bothering to hide it. Elena's cheeks burned. The humiliation was almost unbearable. For a moment she swayed, dizzy with rage and pain. She pressed a hand to her stomach and closed her eyes, reminding herself to breathe. The baby moved, a flutter of hope in the darkness. Suddenly the world shifted. Elena realized she had nothing left to lose. She was already the subject of gossip. She was already an outcast. But she was still standing. No matter what Alexander or Lily said, she was not defeated. In that instant, she felt something harden inside her, a resolve, not bitterness. She would not let them write her story. As midnight approached, Elena checked her phone. The mysterious message was still there. "Your jet is still waiting. Terminal C, please respond if you are ready for a new beginning." It was crazy. It was reckless. But it was hers. She took one last look at the ballroom, the place where her marriage had ended, where her humiliation had reached its peak. And then she turned and walked out, her head held high. For the first time in a long time, Elena Vance felt the future rushing to meet her. And she was not afraid. A secret plan and a new beginning. For most of the city, Alexander Cross was the golden boy. Ambitious, cunning, charming in that effortless way of the well-bred. People trusted his handshakes and followed his advice. They called him a visionary, a leader, a family man. He cultivated the perfect image, never letting anyone see the shadows lurking behind his polished smile. But the man Elena had once married was gone. Or perhaps, she thought, as she drove away from the gala in the back seat of a silent car, he had never existed at all. Maybe she had only fallen in love with a fantasy, the kind of fantasy Alexander wove so well. Inside the ballroom, Alexander reveled in the glow of his social victory. His phone buzzed ceaselessly with messages. "Congrats, spectacular couple." "Where did you find her?" For hours, he played the perfect host, introducing Lily as his inspiration, his reason to believe in love again. She would laugh on cue, clutch his hand possessively, always making sure the world saw them as a couple. Lily Garcia was, if nothing else, ambitious. She had grown up in a small coastal town, one of 3 sisters in a house where beauty was a weapon and ambition was a currency. At 23, she already knew how to charm a man, how to twist his words to seem like gifts, and how to attract the gaze of every woman in the room, if only to inspire envy. In Alexander, she had found her perfect target. Older, successful, newly single, and so desperate to prove he could trade in his old life for something younger and brighter. But Lily's charm was a double-edged sword. She was a master at playing the part of the perfect girlfriend, adorable in public, flirty at just the right moment, a little wild, but never out of control. She would whisper jokes in Alexander's ear and touch his shoulder possessively, always making sure the world saw them as a couple. But beneath the flawless surface, she was calculating, always looking for her next advantage. Alexander thrived on this new energy. He told himself he deserved happiness, that Elena had been holding him back, that he had done everything right and still gotten the raw end of the deal. He felt no guilt for what he had done. In fact, he felt vindicated. "She'll be begging to come back," he had boasted more than once. "She's nothing without me." He even made a bet with Lily, standing on the balcony above the gala ballroom, their glasses sweating in the humid summer air. "How long do you give it before she calls?" he asked, a sneer on his face. Lily took a sip of her champagne, her eyes gleaming with malice. 2 days, she said. "She looks like she's never worked a real day in her life." "Where's she going to go, Alexander? You're the best thing that ever happened to her." Alexander smirked, emboldened. 3 days, Lily. She'll be crawling back, and I'll make her beg. You'll see." Neither of them gave a second thought to the woman whose life they had just destroyed. To them, Elena was the past, the boring shadow, the burden that was better left forgotten. They did not see the strength brewing beneath her silence. They did not realize she was already halfway out the door, forging a future for herself and the baby growing inside her. Later that night, in the privacy of their hotel suite, Lily checked her social media. Dozens of new followers, hundreds of likes. She took a selfie of her and Alexander in bed, with a single heart emoji. She sent it to her private chat, and the replies were instant. "You got him, girl! That's the De La Cruz penthouse, isn't it? My God, you're really living his life." Lily smiled. She liked this version of herself. Powerful, desired, envied. Alexander showered, changed into designer loungewear, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He was already plotting his next move. He imagined the headlines. De La Cruz reimagined. His tragic divorce would become a story of redemption. A man who had found happiness after heartbreak. He had traded his life for a more exciting one. He knew how this city worked. Image was everything, and he was always 2 steps ahead. He never considered that Elena might be the one writing the next chapter. The silence that changed everything. The next morning, Alexander woke up to another flurry of press. His face was everywhere, smiling with Lily, laughing with investors, living the good life. The tabloids dubbed Lily the new queen of finance. Alexander's phone was full of invitations, offers, and flattery. He reveled in the attention, convinced that he had finally won. But as he sat on the balcony, drinking his coffee, one nagging thought kept circling his mind. Elena hadn't called. She hadn't texted, sent furious emails, or desperate messages. He expected tears, or at least a demand for money. But the only thing in his inbox was a brief message from his lawyer confirming the divorce papers had been filed. He mentioned it to Lily over breakfast, trying to sound nonchalant. "I find it weird," he said, picking at his omelet. "She's so quiet, not even arguing over the settlement. It's like she's just disappeared." Lily shrugged, unconcerned. "Maybe she finally got the message. Maybe she's just embarrassed. Who cares? She's ancient history. We're the bull story now, darling." Alexander tried to agree. He told himself he didn't care, that Elena was nothing to him now. But deep down, the silence unsettled him. He liked predictable women. He liked to be the one in control. And Elena, with her quiet dignity and stubborn resilience, was suddenly an unknown variable in a game he thought he had already won. Neither Alexander nor Lily realized how quickly their luck was about to change, or that the woman they had cast aside would soon be at the center of the city's biggest scandal. Interactive question. What do you think Alexander's reaction will be when he finds out Elena's secret? Do you think he'll regret what he did? The grandmother's secret, the heir's power, the public humiliation after the private betrayal was suffocating. The city's news cycle fed on the scandal, and Alexander Cross knew how to feed it. Before Elena could catch her breath the morning after the gala, her face was on 6 tabloid websites. Wife of Alexander Cross left in the cold. Finance magnate moves on with younger flame. And the headline she couldn't escape. The ex who can't move on. At first, Elena thought it would be a 24-hour circus, nothing more. She tried to ignore her phone, but it vibrated all morning with texts from friends, family, and acquaintances who had read the stories. Some were kind, asking if she was okay. Others were sending thinly veiled curiosity, disguised as concern. A few messages were cruel. "Wish you would have tried harder," one said. "You should have known he would never settle for someone like you." Every time Elena went out, she felt the stares. At the grocery store, at the pharmacy. Even walking down her new street, people would whisper. Strangers seemed to recognize her, her swollen belly and the tired dark circles under her eyes. She kept her head down, wearing sunglasses, and her world grew small. She spent her days working on freelance bookkeeping jobs, stretching her grandmother's small inheritance to cover rent, groceries, and doctor's appointments. The worst part came a week after the gala, when a glossy magazine published a photo shoot from the event. There was Alexander, arm around Lily, both of them beaming. Elena was on the edge of the frame, blurry, out of focus, a ghost at her own funeral. The caption underneath was more cutting than any headline. Some women lose with grace, others just lose. That night, Elena sat at her friend's small kitchen table, scrolling through the comment sections she knew she should ignore. The vitriol was endless. What did she expect? Did she let herself go? He traded up. She should have seen it coming. Single mom in the city? She'll be begging to come back. You'll see. A wave of despair almost engulfed her. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling her baby move. For the first time since she left Alexander, she allowed herself to cry, the tears falling silently onto the table. She cried for the future she had lost, for the love that had turned poisonous, for the sense of security she no longer had. She cried until the pain was washed away by exhaustion and the smallest glimmer of something else. Rage. Because underneath the pain was a growing, cold fury. She hadn't asked for this war, but she wouldn't let it destroy her. Elena looked around the tiny, cluttered, but safe kitchen. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. Never let them decide your worth, honey. You know who you are. Elena decided that night that she would not be a joke. She would not be the sad, defeated ex-wife Alexander and Lily expected her to be. If this was rock bottom, she would use it as her foundation. Meanwhile, Alexander was enjoying his reign at the top. He gave interviews, smiling for the cameras, managing the narrative in his favor. Sometimes people just grow apart, he told a primetime news host. I wish Elena all the best. In private, he sent her one last email with the subject line, For your own good, Elena, I'm sorry it had to end this way. I'll cover your rent for 2 more months. After that, you'll have to figure things out. I'll take care of the baby's expenses. There's no need for lawyers. Just do what's right for everyone. You'll thank me later. Elena read the message 3 times, her hands trembling. There was no regret in his words, only arrogance. He truly believed she was hopeless without him. He truly believed his humiliation would break her. She wanted to reply, to tell him how wrong he was. But instead, she deleted the email and blocked his number. She was tired of begging. She was tired of playing by rules he had written. The days passed. Elena focused on rebuilding. She joined support groups for single mothers, found small freelance projects, and started attending business networking events. She bought a second-hand laptop with the last of her inheritance and quietly began to plot a path forward. For the first time in months, hope flickered in her chest. And then, one night, her phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number. Your jet is still waiting. Terminal C. Please reply if you are ready for a new beginning. Elena stared at the message. The impulse to dismiss it as a scam was strong, but something in it, a whisper of possibility, called to her. She looked at her belly, then out the window at the city lights. Maybe it was crazy. Maybe it was the only way out. The next morning, while Alexander and Lily were enjoying a penthouse brunch, news spread of a mysterious woman flying first class on a private jet from a private airport, destination unknown. The tabloids speculated, but no one guessed the truth. For Elena, it wasn't an escape. It was a return to herself. She left her humiliation in Madrid. Ahead of her was the first chapter she would write on her own terms. The grandmother's legacy and the heir's unraveling. Elena never thought she could fall so far so fast. The night she left Madrid was a blur. 1 minute she was sitting in her friend's kitchen, with nothing but a half-eaten sandwich and the glow of her phone. The next, she was wrapped in the back seat of a sleek black car, heading for a private airport. The city slid by her window, the neon lights blurred by tears. Every street was a memory. Late-night walks with Alexander, their favorite bakery, the playground she dreamed of taking her child to someday. every beat of her heart was heavy with loss. At the airport, everything felt surreal. The uniformed driver guided her to a private jet. She expected a rich man's prank or an embarrassing mistake. She almost turned back more than once, but at the stairs, a tall, gray-haired man in a tailored suit greeted her. "Ms. Vance, I'm Mr. Gold. We were expecting you." His voice was quiet, kind, and reassuring. Elena was silent for the entire flight. She barely touched the gourmet food she was served. She couldn't sleep in the plush reclining seat and flinched every time the baby moved. She kept replaying the last month in her mind. Alexander's betrayal, the whispers at the gala, her own face in the tabloids, the emails, the texts, the shame. She felt her identity slipping through her fingers. For years, she had built her life around being the perfect wife. And now, stripped of that role, she no longer knew who she was. The jet landed just after dawn in a city she didn't recognize. A skyline of glass and steel, but unfamiliar, intimidating. Mr. Gold led her to another car, handed her a folder, and explained as they drove. "You've been offered a sanctuary. Your privacy and security are guaranteed here. There are people waiting who care about your future." Elena didn't understand. She barely listened as he explained that everything had been arranged. A secure apartment, a generous monthly allowance, new legal representation, even prenatal care at one of the country's top clinics. It was like stepping into someone else's life, a life where she wasn't haunted by humiliation or fear. But that didn't mean the pain disappeared. For the first few days, Elena barely left her new apartment. She would stare at the ceiling, numb, letting the hours pass. She barely ate. She looked at old photos, sometimes breaking down, seeing a picture of her smiling with Alexander, with their friends, with baby shower gifts she would never open. She was tormented by self-doubt. Was it her fault? Had she been too naive, too trusting? Was she destined to fail alone? She barely answered the phone when it rang, but her mother's name popped up one afternoon, and Elena allowed herself to pick up. "Honey, where are you?" Her mother's voice trembled with worry. Elena's voice was small. "I left. I had to. I can't come back, Mom." There was a pause. Then her mother's voice was quiet. "You did the right thing, Elena. It's not your fault. You're not alone. I'm so proud of you." That night, Elena allowed herself to cry. She let the pain wash over her, and she cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes stung, until she finally collapsed into an exhausted sleep. In her dreams, she saw Alexander and Lily laughing, the city judging her, her own child clinging to her hand. She woke up with a scream, trembling, her heart racing, and she wondered if the pain would ever leave her. But the letter from her grandmother. The days became a blur. Elena forced herself to eat, to shower, to get dressed. She saw a therapist Mr. Gold had arranged, a kind woman who listened without judgment. Elena told her everything, her fears, her rage, her guilt. "You've been through a trauma," the therapist told her. "It's okay not to be okay. You have permission to fall apart. The important thing is that you're still here." But it wasn't easy. Every headline about Alexander and Lily felt like another slap. The tabloids ran stories about their new beginning. A glossy magazine featured photos of Lily on Alexander's arm, wearing Elena's jewels, lounging in Elena's old home. The public, it seemed, had chosen their winner. Elena felt the old panic return every time she saw her reflection. She barely recognized herself. She felt lost between lives, between identities, between hope and despair. She wanted to be strong for her baby, but most days she felt weak, helpless, unworthy of anything good. One night, a storm rattled the windows of her new home. She stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching lightning flash across the sky. The power flickered, and for a moment the outside world disappeared, leaving only her and the baby. She whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know how to do this alone." But as the thunder faded, so did the terror. Elena felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but the smallest seed of resolve. She remembered her mother's words, "You're not alone." She thought of the kindness in Mr. Gold's eyes, the calm in the therapist's voice, the tiny life inside her that kept growing, that kept fighting. She took a shaky breath and stood a little taller. She might be lost, she might be scared, but she was not defeated. Not yet. She would keep going, one step at a time, until she found herself again. Outside, the storm finally broke, and the city was washed clean. The ending that changes everything. The new queen of finance, Elena stood at the window of her new apartment, watching the city turn pink with the morning sun. For days, she had barely existed, drifting between pain and exhaustion, feeling like an exile in her own life. But something was changing inside her. The endless tears had dried. The "why me, why now" questions were replaced by a new one. What if this isn't the end? What if this is just the beginning? A soft knock sounded on her door just after breakfast. Elena opened it to find Mr. Gold in the hallway, as impeccable as ever, with a thick envelope in his hand. "Ms. Vance, do you have a moment?" His voice was respectful, never pushy. Elena nodded and let him in, curiosity mixed with caution. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table and placed the envelope between them. "You no longer have to be afraid," he said softly. "It's time for you to remember who you are and what you're entitled to." He slid the envelope toward her. Elena opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of documents, legal papers, bank statements, a birth certificate, and a letter in her grandmother's familiar round handwriting. The sight of that handwriting made Elena's heart fill with a sudden ache. She read the letter slowly, tears in her eyes. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means you are at a crossroads. I always knew you were stronger than you thought, and I never wanted you to depend on anyone. You are the heir to my estate, not just the savings I left in trust, but the controlling shares in the companies your grandfather and I built for 40 years. They are yours. I hope you never need them, but if you do, use them with the wisdom and kindness you have always shown. The lawyers will help you. You are not alone. I love you, grandmother." Elena leaned back, stunned. She had known about a small inheritance, but this was different. There were account numbers with balances she could barely comprehend, property documents for estates all over the world, and attached to the letter, a formal notice. She was now the majority shareholder of the Sutter Group, a global investment group with interests in real estate, technology, and media. Mr. Gold watched her, kind and patient. "Your grandmother asked me to protect your interests until you were ready," he said. "You are one of the wealthiest women in the country, Ms. Vance. You owe Alexander nothing. In fact, he doesn't even know who you really are. It was your grandmother's wish that your identity remain private until you needed to take control." Elena's mind raced. Why had her grandmother never told her all of this? "She wanted you to be loved for who you are, not for your money," Mr. Gold explained. "She knew the world could be cruel to women with power. But now you have all the resources you need to protect yourself and your son." And he added with a small smile, You have the means to write your own story. Elena's hands trembled as she went through the documents. The numbers were staggering. She was used to clipping coupons and checking bank balances before every purchase. The idea that she could buy an apartment, start a business, or even leave the country if she wanted to, without asking anyone's permission, felt unreal. But slowly, the reality set in. Elena felt her shoulders straighten, her breathing calm. Perhaps this was what her grandmother meant. Not just freedom from Alexander, but the power to help others, to control her own destiny. The humiliation, the public shame, the heartbreak. It was all a storm she could weather because she wasn't defenseless. She wasn't a victim. For the first time since her life fell apart, Elena felt something akin to hope. And not just hope, but determination. She met with Mr. Gold's legal team. She learned about her new properties, about the philanthropic foundations her grandmother had created, about the board seats that came with her name. She changed her phone number, hired private security, and moved into a more secure penthouse, this time with a view that stretched to the horizon. She began to heal, one small step at a time. She started seeing her therapist twice a week. She wrote letters to her unborn son, promising to be better, stronger, to create a safe and loving world. She made a plan to use her wealth, quietly at first, supporting women's shelters and small businesses run by single mothers. As the weeks passed, Elena's resolve grew. Her hair regained its shine, her eyes their light. She bought new clothes, not for anyone else, but for herself, to remind her of who she was becoming. She met with a business coach and began sketching ideas for her own nonprofit organization, inspired by her grandmother's legacy. One night, looking out at the city from her new balcony, Elena made a promise to herself and her son. We will never let anyone write our story for us again. News began to spread, quietly at first, that the abandoned wife no longer lived in the shadows. The tabloids tried to track her down, but her lawyers shut them down. The people who had mocked her, who had called her weak, began to wonder. Had they underestimated Elena Vance? The answer was yes, and her ex-husband was about to find out that the woman he had discarded was not only surviving, she was about to get everything back and more. Interactive question. What do you think Alexander's reaction will be when he finds out Elena's true identity? Will he try to get her back? Revenge is a life well lived. Elena Vance's transformation didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. For weeks, she would wake before dawn, walking through her new penthouse with a sense of purpose she had almost forgotten she could feel. The pain of the betrayal and public shame still lingered, but it was no longer the center of her story. She was now writing a new narrative, one in which she was the author, not the victim. She started each day with quiet rituals that anchored her. Hot tea by the window, gentle yoga, a journal where she scribbled hopes, fears, and affirmations. You are not small. You are not helpless. She said it out loud to herself until her voice stopped trembling. She bought fresh flowers and put them in every room. No one was coming to rescue her, but she no longer needed rescuing. The transformation was both internal and external. Elena hired a stylist, not to impress anyone, but to help her rediscover what made her feel beautiful and strong. Gone were the supportive wife's clothes. In came bold colors, crisp cuts, clothing that celebrated her changing body and the life she was carrying. She cut her hair into a sleek bob, a visible line between her past life and the one she was reclaiming. The first time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She smiled, a real smile. Elena's newfound power radiated in everything she did. She started attending networking groups under her own name, not Alexander's. When she walked into business meetings, she was met with surprise, sometimes even skepticism. After all, they had seen the headlines, heard the gossip. But Elena was unfazed. She let her ideas speak for themselves. When board members questioned her vision, she would respond with hard numbers, quiet confidence, and the authority that came from being a majority shareholder of the company. She no longer asked for a seat at the table. She ran the meeting. The people who had once ignored her, the women who whispered at galas, and the men who sneered at her expense, began to pay attention. It wasn't just the money or the power. It was the way she carried herself, unapologetic, kind, and unshakable. She wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake, but she was determined to use her resources to make a real difference. Elena's first major project was the launch of her nonprofit organization, the Hope Springs Foundation, dedicated to helping women and children escape domestic abuse and rebuild their lives. She poured her energy into creating job training programs, affordable childcare, and legal assistance. In every press release, at every fundraiser, in every interview, she made sure the story wasn't about her ex-husband or her humiliation, but about the women she intended to empower. Behind the scenes, Elena was discreetly buying up control of properties Alexander had tried to sell during their marriage. She met with lawyers and accountants, unraveling the financial chaos he had left behind. Each victory, however small, felt like reclaiming a piece of her dignity. She worked with her grandmother's advisors to restructure the family's commercial properties so she could protect them and her son for generations to come. As her due date approached, Elena took time off to rest and prepare for motherhood. But she didn't hide. She attended industry galas and charity balls, no longer clinging to the shadows. The first time she arrived at a high-profile event alone, in a flowing navy blue dress that celebrated her pregnant belly and a pair of antique diamond earrings, the cameras didn't know where to look. The same photographers who once pitied her now clamored for a shot. Inside the ballroom, the whispers turned to awe. Elena was no longer the abandoned wife. She was a force, quiet, radiant, and unmistakably in control. Old acquaintances, even some who had once sided with Alexander, found reasons to congratulate her. Some apologized in clumsy, halting ways. Elena accepted every apology with a quiet grace, but she never forgot who had stood by her and who hadn't. Her transformation was not just physical or financial, it was spiritual. Elena forgave herself for the years she had spent doubting her worth, for the nights she had begged someone else to see her. Now she was writing her own rules. In therapy, she worked through the guilt and rage, making peace with the woman she used to be. She told herself and her unborn son every day, "We are enough." Elena's return did not go unnoticed by the press. From scandal to CEO, one headline read, "Wall Street's new power player." But Elena didn't care about the noise. What mattered was the community she was building, the security she had found for herself and her baby, and the future she could finally believe in. The night before her son was born, Elena stood on her balcony, looking out at the city that had once completely swallowed her. She felt her son's gentle kicks and whispered, "You saved me, little one. Now I'll save us both." She knew she could handle whatever tomorrow brought, no matter how many headlines, how many whispers, or how many men like Alexander came her way. The next morning, as the sun rose, she packed her hospital bag herself. She didn't need a retinue or anyone's permission. She called a car, signed a few final papers for a new business deal, and left a message for her legal team. "We're beginning." Elena Vance was back, and this time, she was here to stay. Final call to action, a kingdom for a queen. The city that had once completely swallowed her was now Elena Vance's kingdom. As the sun rose over the skyline, the outside world seemed fresh and full of promise. Elena was in her penthouse nursery, holding her newborn son against her chest, watching the sunrise through the windows. The baby slept peacefully. His tiny fingers curled around hers, each breath a gentle assurance that life could begin again. No matter how brutally it had once been interrupted, she had come a long way from the woman who had been humiliated and abandoned. In those first desperate days, she couldn't imagine she would ever feel safe, much less powerful. But as she cradled her son, Elena knew she was more than a survivor. She was a builder, a creator, a mother, and a leader. She had taken every wound and transformed it into strength. She had used her pain as a map, not a prison. Her journey had become a legend in the city. Magazines, podcasts, and social media were filled with stories of her transformation. Not the salacious gossip that once tormented her, but articles about her foundation's successes, interviews where she spoke honestly about heartbreak, motherhood, and resilience. Hundreds of women wrote to her, sharing their own struggles and thanking her for making them feel seen. "You showed me it's never too late," one message read. "If you can get up, I can get up too." Elena responded to every letter she could. She organized small gatherings at the Hope Springs Foundation headquarters, bringing together women who had survived abuse, betrayal, and abandonment. In every story she heard, she saw pieces of her past self, scared, insecure, desperate for a lifeline. She reminded every woman who came through her doors, "You are not broken. You are not alone. Nobody decides your worth but you." She became a mentor, a role model, and a quiet force for change. She was invited to speak at universities, business forums, and women's leadership summits. Her message was always the same. Strength is not in never falling, but in getting up after every fall. Power isn't about controlling others, but about choosing your own story when others want to write it for you. One autumn evening, Elena hosted a gala at the very same hotel where her public humiliation began. But now, every detail of the event bore her signature. The centerpieces were designed by local survivors. The dinner was catered by a women-owned business, and the guest list was filled with people who believed in second chances. When Elena took the stage, she looked out at the sea of faces, remembering her own journey from invisibility to influence. She told her story, not for pity, but for hope. She spoke of loss, but also of the courage it takes to rebuild. "I was written off by the man who promised to love me," she said, "but I was never truly lost. I just hadn't found my voice yet." The room fell silent, hanging on her every word. "If you remember nothing else, remember this. You are never helpless as long as you have your truth. There is no shame in starting over. There is only strength in refusing to stay silent." The applause was deafening, but Elena didn't measure her impact by the standing ovations. She measured it in the faces of the women who hugged her after the speech, in the phone calls from girls who were dreaming bigger because of her, in the knowledge that her son would grow up seeing his mother as a champion, not a victim. Alexander Cross's name faded from the headlines, replaced by stories of his missteps, his lost deals, his eventual obscurity. Elena never spoke ill of him publicly. She didn't need to. The life she built spoke louder than anything she could ever say. And one day, years later, when her son was old enough to ask deeper questions, she told him everything. Not to hurt him, but to honor the truth. And when she finished, he didn't look at her with pity or anger. He looked at her with admiration. "You didn't give up on me," he said. "Never could," she replied with a smile through her tears. And that was it, the final piece. Elena Vance was abandoned, humiliated, erased. But in the end, she became unforgettable. If Elena's story touched your heart, take a deep breath and ask yourself how many people pass us every day fighting silent battles, rebuilding themselves after heartbreak, carrying burdens alone, proving their worth in a world that refuses to see them. This story isn't just about a woman who was abandoned. It's about a woman who chose to get up when the world tried to keep her down. And somewhere out there, someone you know, maybe a friend, a coworker, maybe even you, is going through something similar. So here's what we want you to do. Leave a comment below and tell us which part of Elena's journey moved you the most. Was it the moment she stood tall at the gala? The way she never gave up fighting for her son? Or maybe the way she faced the past without bitterness? If this story reminded you of your own strength, or the strength of someone you love, comment, "I rise too," and let your voice join a chorus of others who refuse to stay silent. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone, that their story still matters, and that no one's worth is defined by people who failed to see it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to see more stories like this. Stories that inspire, challenge, and heal. Elena didn't need revenge. She needed respect. And in the end, she not only got it, but she became the reason others believe they can get it too. Be a part of this movement, because maybe the next story we tell will be yours.